My name is Wes Connell, and I am RIA's Planning Grant and Contract Review Manager. I will be working with the grantees and RIA's grant managers to process all contracts and change orders as they are submitted for review. Additionally, I will be serving all grantees who are planning grant recipients as their grant manager. In this section, I will provide an overview of the new areas of federal compliance as they relate to the submittal of contracts and change orders for the SCIIP program, which is required before they are executed. This will include a review of the basic requirements that will help ensure the contract or change order review process runs as smoothly as possible. The general contract requirements for SCIIP grant projects should appear pretty familiar to those of you who have worked with RIA in the past through our state grant program. Of course, the contract must contain a clear scope of work which closely resembles the scope of work described in the grantee's SCIIP grant application. It should also include a firm fixed contract amount. There are other specific general provisions which should be included in the contract documents as well. For example, there needs to be a provision providing guidance for progress payments and retainage. For all contracts procured by competitive sealed bids, RIA strongly recommends a retainage of 10% of the total contract price be withheld from progress payments to the contractor. This retainage should be withheld throughout the duration of construction in an effort to ensure timely completion of the project. Because there can be changes to a project once construction gets underway, a provision with guidance concerning the usage, submission, and processing of change orders should be included as well. Additionally, the contract should include language that addresses liquidated damages and work conditions. And lastly, RIA prefers that bid forms include quantities and itemized quantities unless using several lump sum items is necessary for a certain type of work. If the type of work does necessitate the use of several lump sum items, then a schedule of values must be obtained from the low bid contractor. This means that appropriate language with this requirement should be included in the contract. A schedule of values provides a valuable guide to assist both the grantee and the RIA grant managers as they track progress in the grant and process payment applications for the disbursement of grant funds. Before we go any further on SCIIP contracts, let me quickly highlight something that is new for RIA and specific to SCIIP, which is the grant eligibility of SCIIP signage at the construction project site. It is not required for you to have signage at the project site. However, it could be a positive way to show your customers and the surrounding community the significant infrastructure efforts that are underway. I mention it now because you would want to be sure to incorporate it into your contract bid package. In order to include it as an eligible expense, the sign must be itemized on the bid form. A line item should be added reflecting this signage. Second, includes SCIIP project sign specifications in the technical specifications section. Finally, the artwork, sign specs, and language needed for the technical specs section of the contract can be downloaded from our website on the SCIIP implementation page. If another federal program is participating in the project and has its own sign specifications, then you may use those, but please include RIA with its logo on the sign. Before I go over various submittals that come with the different contract types, let me talk again about the System for Award Management, or SAM. Although debarment language has always been included in the RIA project management procedures, verification with SAM is also now a requirement for all projects receiving SCIIP grant funds. This means that SCIIP funds may not go to entities prohibited from doing business with the federal government. All contractors should have active SAM registration at the time of contract execution, and that registration should remain active throughout the duration of the contract period. As part of the contract review process, and using the grantee debarment certification form provided in the SCIIP PMP, grantees must obtain certification regarding debarment and SAM registration from the contractor. This process should be completed after bid opening or acceptance of an RFQ and prior to submitting the post-bid package to RIA for review. Please note it is the responsibility of the grantee and the prime contractor to ensure all subcontractors also have active SAM registration and are not debarred. One thing I would like to note is that some grantees who were awarded funding through SCIIP have special conditions that require submittal of the bid form or package to RIA for review before the project is advertised. In other cases, you may ask RIA to conduct a courtesy preliminary review to make sure all is in place before you bid. Granted, a required review will take precedence over a courtesy review, and certainly both of these steps will take some time. So this should be accounted for in the project schedule. Now let's move on to construction contract submittal items. For the sake of this discussion, let's assume you are to that point in your project when bids have been opened, your engineer has reviewed the bids, an apparent low bidder has been determined, and you are ready to submit everything to RIA for the required review. Many of you are likely familiar with RIA's submission requirements concerning construction contracts. However, everyone, whether pre or post bid, should use the construction contract submission checklist provided in the PMPs in order to ensure no items are missed. We recognize that all items may not be applicable, but what is important to note is that all components should be submitted together as one package. Also, please note that while RIA does not provide a standard bid package or contract agreement for construction contracts, grantees are encouraged to refer to the Engineers Joint Contract Document Committee or EJCDC standard contract documents. These documents are available from the American Society of Civil Engineers, the National Society of Professional Engineers, and the Associated General Contractors of America, or similar organizations. Using standard contract documents like these ensures most, if not all, standards and requirements will be included in the bid package submission. As I've said, after bids are opened publicly, grantees should submit the documentation for review of the contract. Make sure you have not executed any part of the contract, meaning no agreement, notice of award, or notice to proceed has been signed. The bid package should include the instructions to bidders, general conditions, specifications, drawings, and any addenda if they were issued during the advertisement and bid process. Grantees should also submit evidence of the bid advertisement and direct solicitation. At a minimum, bids should be advertised using SCIIP. RIA recommends that projects are advertised for 30 days. If you are not already registered to post in SCIIP, then go ahead and contact them now to get registered so it does not cause a delay once you're ready to advertise your project. A certified bid tabulation should be submitted for review, and it should contain a detailed summary of all bids, bid items, and should be signed by the project engineer. The grantee should submit a recommendation of award from the engineer that includes a review of cost reasonableness, as well as the contract amount and any accepted alternates. Please also provide an explanation of any bid discrepancies. A copy of the winning bidder's response should be provided, which should include the completed bid form. A bid bond should also be submitted in addition to documentation of hazard insurance if it was provided. The completed but unexecuted contract agreement should also be included for review. Please ensure the contract price is clearly listed in the agreement and that all points are filled out, but the contract should be unsigned. One last thing, the bottom of the submission checklist asks grantees to estimate the expected date of issuance of the notice to proceed. Keep in mind that the number of construction days included in the contract to complete the project should be in advance of the June 2026 deadline to allow for closeout of the grant. Please take that into consideration before you execute the contract in order to ensure the project will meet requirement deadlines, and please note we will be monitoring for this. Continuing on with construction contract submittal items, as I just went over, the grantee debarment certification form and documentation of active SAM registration will need to be submitted for review. Grantees must certify that any needed easements, rights-of-way, or property acquisition have been completed and either submit their permits or certify all required permits have been obtained. This can be done by a letter from the Chief Executive Official. If needed, a commitment of additional non-SCIIP or non-RIA funds should be submitted if costs come in higher than anticipated. Please ensure that funding commitment letters are also signed by the Chief Executive Official. These must be submitted as a hard copy with an original wet or signed with pen and ink signature. For all contract reviews, although we will strive to move as quickly as possible, please allow about 30 days for RIA to review the submitted contract documents. To discuss submittal items for professional services, planning, and alternative delivery contracts, I would like to briefly discuss some things to consider when preparing your contracts for submittal to RIA prior to advertisement. These are common items we address with grantees during contract reviews. Taking extra consideration for these tips before submission to RIA for review can help reduce potential delays during the review process. First, ensure all permits, rights-of-way, and/or easements are secured prior to bidding the project. As I've already mentioned, RIA will be unable to complete its review of a submitted contract until the permits or certification that all permits are obtained has been provided by the grantee. Also, be sure that instructions to bidders clearly indicates how the low bid will be determined when alternates or bid divisions are included in the bid form. Oftentimes, the bid form is revised, but the instructions to bidders is not updated to reflect those revisions. Please compare your bid form line items to the application cost estimate to notate any substantive variances. If changes are necessary, then it may help expedite the review process to provide a written explanation from the project engineer describing the need and/or reason for divergence from cost estimate line item quantities. Of course, ensure the construction contract time for completion of the project is within the grant period when submitted to RIA for review. Although it can be strongly encouraged, generally it's not permissible to require mandatory attendance for pre-bid conferences. Next, I believe many of us use our previous work product as a starting point for new projects. This avoids reinventing the wheel when drafting documents for a new project. But please ensure that the bid documents are consistent throughout with the current SCIIP project and that no unrelated remnants are left behind. And lastly, please make sure that contract price is clearly listed in the agreement. Now we'll move back to our discussion of contract submittal items. The next list of contract submittal requirements are for professional service contracts. Similar to construction contracts, we ask that all grantees use the Professional Services Contract Submittal Checklist provided in the SCIIP PMPs when preparing to submit a bid package for review. Use this checklist and ensure all required documents are properly submitted, and it will minimize delays during the review process. Professional service contract submittals should include the RFQ and/or RFP package, which should include a full RFQ or RFP along with any attachments and addenda. The grantee should ensure that such documents adhere to all RIA, state, and federal requirements, including those listed in the General Procurement section of the SCIIP PMPs. Just as with construction contracts, we need to see evidence of direct solicitation and advertisement dates. RIA recommends that professional service RFQs be advertised for 15 to 30 days. The rating committee scores and recommendation of award should also be submitted for review. Offers must be evaluated using only the criteria stated in the advertised RFQ. As an example, the criteria may include things such as qualifications of the firm or personnel, past performance, and experience on similar projects. The rating committee must consist of an uneven number of members. The grantee will also need to submit a copy of the winning offeror's response. A complete but unexecuted contract agreement should also be submitted for review and should include the negotiated contract price as well as other pertinent information. Again, the grantee debarment certification form and documentation of active SAM registration will also need to be submitted for review with professional service contracts. Lastly, if needed, a commitment of additional non-SCIIP or non-RIA funds should be submitted if costs come in higher than anticipated. Funding commitment letters should be signed by the Chief Executive Official, and please remember that this letter must be submitted as a hard copy with an original wet or signed with pen and ink signature. There is another type of contract that has its own set of documents to be submitted, which is the alternative delivery. This type of contract may be used for more complicated projects, such as treatment plants. Grantees that desire to use an alternative delivery method on a SCIIP-funded project should submit the request to RIA in writing outlining the rationale and process. Please consult with RIA for guidance prior to selecting this method. Submittal documentation for alternative delivery contracts include the procurement package with instructions to offerors and/or bidders, general conditions, specifications, drawings, addenda, and the selection factors. Again, RIA does not provide a standard bid or contract package for alternative delivery contracts. So the grantee should ensure that such documents adhere to all RIA, state, and federal requirements, including those listed in the General Procurement section of the SCIIP PMPs. Along with all other documentation, grantees will need to submit evidence of RFQ or RFP advertisement dates and direct solicitations. If offerors were pre-qualified using an RFQ, then include the full RFQ and the evaluations and/or ranking of the responses. If an RFP was used, the grantee should provide the full RFP and an evaluation and ranking of the bids or proposals received, review of cost reasonableness, and the recommendation of award. A copy of the selected offeror's response should also be included in the submittal. As required by the SCIIP PMPs, the grantee should provide documentation demonstrating that the alternative delivery method used is allowed in written local procurement policies and procedures, and that those policies and procedures are in compliance with federal procurement requirements. The bid bond form from the low bidder should also be provided. Documentation of hazard insurance should be submitted for review as well. Remember, hazard insurance is not required by RIA, but it is encouraged. A completed but unexecuted contract agreement should also be submitted for review and should include the negotiated contract price. Lastly, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, for alternative delivery contracts, just like construction contracts, you should submit the grantee debarment certification form, proof of SAM registration, and a commitment of additional funds if necessary. You should also provide certification that all real property or easements and permits have been acquired. It is important to note here that RIA will not be able to complete its review until all required permits are provided and a certification concerning real property and/or easements has been submitted. One last important thing concerning contracts I would like to mention. For those of you who have had state grants in the past, you're likely familiar with RIA's requirement to submit a notice to proceed once fully executed. However, for SCIIP grants, all contracts reviewed by RIA, whether for construction, professional services, or alternative delivery, the notice to proceed as well as the contract agreement must be submitted to RIA once they have been fully executed. It is acceptable to supply these executed documents electronically. Let's move on from submitting contracts to that point in the project where changes need to be made. This requires a grantee to use a change order at the recommendation of the engineer. All contract change orders must be submitted to RIA for review. RIA considers any change order that involves more than a 10% change in quantities or total contract price to be a major change order. Any major change orders must be submitted prior to its execution. Furthermore, a grant amendment request may be required with the submission of a major change order. Minor change orders that do not involve a substantial change in quantities or contract price do not need advance approval from RIA, but they should be submitted with any subsequent request for payments. As I've mentioned in other parts of this section, there is also a change order submission checklist provided in the back of the SCIIP PMPs. Using this submission checklist ensures that all required information is being submitted for review. Because all change orders must be submitted for review, the following additional documentation must be submitted. You should use and submit the standard change order form that was included in the contract documents. Grantees should submit a description of changes including itemized quantities and costs. A justification of need for the change order should be submitted by the local official or project manager, including an explanation of changes to the scope of work or customers served. A letter from the project engineer should be submitted that provides an explanation of cost reasonableness as well as documentation of how costs were determined if that amount is different from the bid form itemized costs. The documentation could be invoices from the contractor or a material supplier or other communication that indicates the change. If applicable, the grantee should submit a map showing the location of any new or revised activities. Depending on changes to the project location, a grant amendment may be required. And lastly, as I've mentioned several times this afternoon, if needed, a hard copy of a new or revised funding commitment letter should be submitted. Please make sure this letter contains an original signature of the Chief Executive Official. This concludes the Contract and Change Order Review section. Thank you for your kind attention.